Now, my introduction is going to be very simple. So, we're really privileged tonight because you guys, regulars here, you've heard about Mentor Graphics Corporation 50 times. But tonight, we have, in fact, the chair and CEO of Mentor Graphics Corporation. So everybody has to be on their best behavior, okay? So this is a great guy, and I just want to say, and I've said it to all these people, to Wally and Greg Hinckley, who's also there, that there's a lot of people in the community that could be making contributions to make things like this happen, and Mentor Graphics has been a real leader, and really, really appreciate that kind of support and vision. So it's my pleasure to introduce Wally Rines, who's the chair and CEO of Mentor Graphics Corporation.
So thank you, Terry. Tonight, we're going to hear from someone who the BBC News magazine has called the most influential woman in all of the computer world. I first met Esther 32 years ago, and Esther has always been an incredible person. She started at Harvard at age 16, graduated with a degree in economics, and went to work for Forbes magazine, first as a fact checker and then as a reporter, and then later as a security analyst. And I can tell you from the early days with Esther, one of the things that really amazed me is you can take a complete typewritten or printed page, and Esther can glance at it, and she will tell you the misspellings and the typographical errors just from looking. A unique talent, I first noticed. And when I met her in 1993, she had just purchased the Rosen newsletter, Rosen electronic newsletter, which is a little bit strange in a way because Ben Rosen was the premier analyst for the semiconductor industry. And if you got a write-up in Ben's newsletter, you had a chance for your chip to be considered by other people. And so it's a little strange because Esther really wasn't a chip person. She may have known something about chips, but she was really a software person. But the thing that came along with the Rosen electronic newsletter was the Personal Computer Forum, which I started going to in 1979, and Esther got that. But on that first day when I met Esther, Gordy Campbell, who founded HICCup and then Chips and Technologies and a number of other companies, was with me, and we were giving presentations to the press on a second source agreement. This is one of these agreements where each of you agree to build each other's chips in the hope that more people will accept them and design them in. And we had 12 interviews that day. Gordy did 15 minutes, I did 15 minutes, and then we had questions and answers. And Esther was at the end of the day. Well, Gordy and I were getting a little bit slap-happy by that point, and we didn't know who Esther was anyway. And so we decided to switch roles. I gave Gordy's presentation, he gave my presentation, just to see if Esther would notice. She did. And in fact, I don't know whether she thought it was so entertaining or whether these two dinglings were just different enough, but she wrote it up, she put it in the newsletter, and then for the next 6 or 7 years at least, she invited Gordy and me to participate in the Personal Computer Forum. She put us on panels that we probably didn't belong on, and she became the most powerful person in terms of deciding who would speak, what panel they would speak on, where would Bill Gates be, where would Steve Jobs be, how it would all work. And in fact, that Personal Computer Forum became the place to be. And of course, I've always been grateful to Esther because I got to know all of these people long before they were rich and famous. And we had started playing charades in Ben Rosen's room, and Esther continued the informal environment, and it was a great period. Now, Esther came from a very remarkable family as well. And I've had the chance to meet her father and her brother. Her brother is now a well-known nonfiction author and historian of technology. And when I met him, he had just recently come down from a tree. Now, what I mean by that is that he had decided at age 16 that he should come to the Northwest and build a tree house in British Columbia, live in the tree house, and he didn't do just nothing. He designed historically accurate kayaks that were reproductions of what was used by the Russians to come across the Aleutian Islands, and he spent 20 years doing that. And he might still be in that tree, except that a woman working for a news magazine decided to do a story on him. She went back in the woods. She was a photographer, a writer. She interviewed him in his treehouse, and she married him. And she became the photographer for the Personal Computer Conference every year thereafter, so we got to see a lot of her. Now, Esther's father, of course, her mother was also a distinguished mathematician, but her father was the most famous of all. Dozens of major awards and prizes. He's known for the Dyson sphere, the Dyson operator, the Dyson conjecture, Dyson's eternal intelligence, the Dyson number, the Dyson tree, the Dyson transform. You get the idea. A lot of significant advancements in mathematics and in physics. And he was part of the Institute for Advanced Studies, which was set up next to Princeton University. And in the late 1940s, people like Albert Einstein and John von Neumann, Wolfgang Pauli of the Pauli exclusion principle, and others were there. And in fact, Alan Turing was at Princeton at that time getting his mathematics degree. Well, Freeman Dyson today, despite all those accomplishments, is still active at age 91. And I happened to see an article in the Washington Post just a few weeks ago talking about the movie, The Imitation Game, that covers the life of Alan Turing. And they interviewed Freeman Dyson, and he explained to them how misleading the movie was because it concentrated on the development of the computer that broke the Enigma code and saved the war effort in England. But in fact, Freeman Dyson was one of the few who recognized when Turing's original paper was published that he was postulating something much more meaningful, and that was, in fact, the idea that someday computers would be separated from the software that ran with them. Up to that point, the mechanical computers had the program built into the mechanics, electronic computers had plug boards, and just the concept of a separate computer software was a new one. So it's not so remarkable that Esther ended up gravitating toward software, but she did much more. She became a writer. She's written dozens and dozens of books and articles for major journals and released 2.0 on the internet effects on life. She's been an investor, nearly 20 startups, including 3 that were sold to Google, 2 that were sold to Microsoft. She sat on more than 20 boards, including one of my favorites, the board of 23andMe. If you've never signed up, you should, as well as the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, another one that preserves the freedom of computer communication. And she was one of the first 10 volunteers in the world for the Personal Genome Project, exploring the risk associated with publishing your genome and the effects it may have on your ability to buy insurance or get a job. She's been a philanthropist for nonprofits and advisory organizations. She's the founding chairperson of ICANN, which assigns internet names and numbers. And she's had a wide variety of special interests in the post-Soviet transition of Eastern Europe. She took a special interest, traveled and studied there. She's interested in space travel and became a backup passenger for space travel and a graduate of the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center for Space Travel. And most recently, she's focused on breakthrough efficacy in healthcare. She's the founder of HICCup, or the Health Initiative Coordinating Council. She just launched its Way to Wellville contest of 5 places, 5 years, 5 metrics, making lasting improvements in health and vitality, including here in Oregon, Clatsop County. She's focusing on the production of health and investment in health and technology startups. Esther wants her epitaph to read, quote, "I wasn't done yet. There's still more to learn and to fix." And at the bottom of her emails, the postscript says, "Always make new mistakes." For the Linus Pauling Memorial Lecture, we're going to hear now from the most influential woman in the computer world. Welcome Esther Dyson talking on the way to Wellville. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Wally. That was so nice and so long. I feel I should just sit down while I'm ahead. But what I am going to do is explain what the Way to Wellville is, and it's relevant. It's in Clatsop County, along with 4 other places. I'll try to do that in 20 to 30 minutes, and then we're going to have an unusually long and I hope enjoyable Q&A. So this is serious stuff, but I'm not trying to be too serious about it, because honestly, the last 2 years I have learned more and had more fun learning it than anything I've ever done, including the space training that, let me figure this out here, that Wally just mentioned. So that's me over on the left in the cute hat. I love doing interesting things. My parents are scientists. I've had a privileged life and done amazing things. And as Wally, I need to fact check you. It was 1983, Wally, sorry, not 1993. But the internet, like everything else, gets out there, gets established, and I started losing interest in helping recent college graduates find friends to go to concerts with, and started thinking healthcare is probably one of the more interesting places where we have unsolved problems, where the internet can help, etc. And started focusing a little more on that, and asked to be a judge for the Healthcare XPRIZE, which was about 6 years ago now. I thought that was really exciting. The idea was you'd take a couple of populations of 10,000 people each, apply some intervention on them, and the company that had the best intervention that created the most improvement at the least cost would win the Healthcare XPRIZE. But it never happened, and I thought it was a really good idea, but I started realizing healthcare is a repair job. Is it really the most cost effective? Wouldn't it be more effective, just like with your car, to give it oil regularly? With people, how can we produce health instead of fixing bad health with care? And this is a very useful chart that basically shows what matters to health is really not health care. It's where you live, how you live, both what you do to yourself and what the environment does to you. Our spending is mostly on health care, but over on the right, what you see is we don't really get much for that spending. We've got really a healthcare crisis in this country. The Army complains that more and more people they get aren't fit to serve. Healthcare costs are going up. you look around you, and it's not just physical health, it's also mental health and all these related conditions. What can we do about it? And I got interested in the quantified self, these little devices and bands, and it's really sexy stuff, just like genetics, IT, and personalized medicine. But at the same time, I kept thinking, we really need to focus on health. And I was about to give a talk saying someone should do something like an XPRIZE for health rather than care. And I could give that talk here. Someone else should do something. I decided, just in order to give a better speech, I decided to found something that I called at the last moment the Health Initiative Coordinating Council. Very great name for exactly what it was. It wouldn't do anything, but it would coordinate efforts of other people to produce healthy communities. And having made this announcement, I had to learn about what it was I was about to do, talk to lots of people in health and healthcare, and sort of began to formulate communities of 100,000 or fewer so that you could do something without a huge amount of resources. What you did would stay in the community and affect people so that's why it's not a suburb of Portland, but all of Clatsop County. If you live in Clatsop County, chances are you eat there, you play there, you worship there, you work there. You're not going off to a fancy restaurant in Portland for lunch. You're there. And I began to think about other things. And at one of these brainstormings, this guy showed up and asked all the ARCA questions. How are you going to fund it? How are you going to find communities to do it? I hired him. He's our CEO. So I get to do all the fun stuff and travel to places with Marvin, who's our CEO, whom you'll meet later on. And Rick runs the shop. So it began as something like a pseudo-clinical trial, but changed into, and actually, this slide is out of order, but it is basically the story of how we do things. We're not funding a single program. We're not nice white lady from New York coming in and telling people how to live. We're finding people already on this journey to health and helping them do it together. So with Rick joining, we spent another year kind of figuring out what to do, and then put out a call for applications across the U.S. for communities of 100,000 or fewer with an existing coalition of local stakeholders focused on producing health rather than just health care, and got 42 applications, to our great surprise. So Marvin, Rick, and I spent most of last summer traveling, visiting 10 of these places that looked like some of the most promising prospects. And lo and behold, Clatsop was one of them. And there were 4 others: Lake County in California, Greater Muskegon, Michigan, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and Niagara Falls, New York. So those are 5. They're not the best 5. They are the best group of 5. So we wanted some diversity, not just 5 clones. They're geographically distinct. They have different demographics. And most interestingly, they have different entities leading the coalition. In the case of Clatsop, it's Care Oregon, the local Medicaid outfit, which also operates here. Our core constituents, it's not just these leadership organizations, and in many ways it's not the grownups. Many grownups are too busy, they've given up, they're kind of cynical. They have busy lives. That trying to stay healthy, they may just, they have other things to worry about. But when you talk about their children, they care. So in many ways, that's the way into health. And of course, if you can influence a child, that has huge influence on their later health and, of course, their habits and so forth. One way to reach the children is school lunch. It's probably one of the most important influences on their health. Not just what they eat in school, but then what they eat after school, and can they learn to like healthy food? Do they take it for granted what a healthy meal is, and so forth. This is actually Jessica Lewis, who manages lunch in Seaside High School up in Clatsop County. We were there yesterday, and here we are. I'm inspecting a school lunch. And in general, though we work with health systems and early childhood visiting programs and so forth and so on, one thing we hope to do long term, not necessarily in the first year, is reach out to food companies. Because unless we can get food companies at scale to be selling healthy food, unless it can be profitable to produce health, it's not going to happen. So we're not focused on charity and just being nice, but on actually making systemic changes and figuring out business models for producing health in these communities. And finally, we're focused on evaluation. Many of you are in business, many of you work at Mentor Graphics, and you are accountable to your shareholders. People in the business of producing health also have to be accountable. It's not good enough to do good things. You need to measure the outcomes. Are people actually healthier because of your efforts? And as we at HICCup go forward over the next 5 years, trying to help communities do this, we're not going to be measuring the results only at the end after 5 years. We're going to be measuring what we're doing as we do it. And like any agile startup, we're going to be changing in response to that. As Wally said, always make new mistakes. So what I'd like to do now is invite Terry back up and Marvin up, and they're going to ask me some tough questions, I think. And then I hope the rest of you will do the same. Thank you. So do we... You get the big chair. Okay. I get the big chair. The glowing light turns off. Oh, great. We sit in the dark. This is really a lovely church. Always make new mistakes. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Is this working?
So
Testing one.
Why
Yep.
don't you,
Great.
great.
Want to sit here?
No.
Okay.
This is. But just sit in the middle. Don't. There we go. Great.
All right, so I'm going to start with just a little bit, and we're going to rotate out to the audience, and various people that have promised me to ask significant questions. We expect you to do that. Robert, you want to get the camera? Good, he's right. We're going to ultimately do this. So who is Marvin?
Good question.
It's for you. Yeah.
My name is Marvin Alves, and I'm the COO for HICCup. And my primary job function is to try to take all her ideas and put some structure around it. And I spend a lot of time in the communities, the 5 communities, but I've been basically, I look at the operations of things.
All right. So man on the ground is weird. So first of all, I wanted to ask, so when I first started looking at HICCup, I was thinking, well, this preventive health thing and so forth is a great idea, and I really, I had some background in that. A venture 20 years ago, and one thing was clear that on a dollar for dollar basis, that dollar of prevention was worth 10 in the curative thing. So, but then why weren't we doing this? Why wasn't it happening? Why were why was the money all going the other way, and why couldn't we do better? And so this has been on my mind and a good thing. So I'm just really excited about this, and particularly people coming like Silicon Valley and this sort of innovative, get it done attitude is just like so wonderful because everybody else is doing like, the state program for whatever, and it sort of worked and sort of didn't. So this is really cool and a new approach and a new thing with measures and the whole bit. So, but the other thing I would say is that it wasn't just like exercise and food. That was my first thought.
No.
So go ahead. Tell me more.
Well, first of all, it's what the community wants. I mean, not that we can't try and give them some ideas, but it's, and part of the challenge is you could do 20 things in any community. We were talking to somebody this afternoon who said they had a list of 94 priorities. But if you do 20, none of them is really going to amount to much. There just isn't enough bandwidth. If you do one, nothing's going to be there to reinforce it. So and you can do very nice math to show this, but somewhere around 4 or 5 is where we expect to focus. And one is inevitably going to be something around prenatal, postnatal, motherhood, teen pregnancy, early childhood education / nutrition. And just an anecdote, we were in Spartanburg where, long story, but they started out with the nice rich people in town at the foundation worried about college graduates to work in their businesses. And they started the Spartanburg academic movement. They looked at this problem and realized actually it's not in college, it's really in high school. And then they looked a bit more and they said, well, maybe it's grade school. So they're now doing early childhood education. And I asked them, so what do you feed these kids? They said, well, we don't really know. We're education, not nutrition. And I said, maybe this is something where Wellville could have a little bit of input. But so there's something with childhood, then inevitably something around mental health and the interaction often between that and the justice system. If you're in the health business, you hear a lot about hospital readmission. But jail readmission is an even worse problem. It's just the people who come out of jail aren't as sympathetic as the nice lady who comes out of the hospital. But the people who come out of jail actually cost us more, and their lives need more repair. Probably not a priority for us, but if we can find it, dental health is something that is like this squared. I mean, it's so easy to fix in theory, and the return is so great. If you have bad dental health, number one, you can get infections that spread into your brain, but if you have no teeth, you can't eat right. Much harder to get a job. It's all these things interact, and in the end, economic development is another key part of it. So there are a lot of ways you get unhealthy, and then that creates other problems that make it hard to get out in any form. And so we're going to try and help communities fix these problems by focusing on 2, 3, or 4 things that can really make a difference. And then if other people do other things around it, God bless them, because they will help.
We have the metaphor of stovepiping, and a lot of times in the communities, you look at these communities, I've looked at, I'm sure you have too, and you're like, there's all this opportunity for this community to form these networks to do things, but people go like, well, that's not my job, we have the budget and we do this and we can't justify doing it. Mm-hmm. But if you guys understand that one of the things you guys are doing is trying to build those bridges between those. Maybe ask Marvin about you and I were talking about how you form with this community.
Yeah, and that's great. I'm glad you brought the word up, stovepiping, because we do see a lot of that, and actually by the community just participating in the Way to Wellville program, they've started to break down those barriers because they realized, there's something that Esther and I have that are special, is that we're not from the community. And so they immediately look at in a different context and through a different lens that, oh, we need to get together because they are coming to visit us. And all of a sudden it becomes this very interesting dynamic, and it's a psychological breakdown of these walls, so the stovepiping, in a sense, starts to disseminate or disappear. But really the beginnings of the work that we're doing, which I feel is very strong, is around creating relationships and really listening to the community and understanding, because we're going to see it very differently than how they see it when they're within. You know, the outsider always sees something slightly different.
I was down, actually, my sister has a place down in Cannon Beach, which is part of...
Yes, right.
Down there, and
We
I was...
drove through it.
Yeah, and I go and visit, I was visiting Haystack Rock, and there was they have these people that show you around Haystack Rock, which is a real place, and I mentioned this young girl there, and I said, there's this program coming, and I sort of outlined it. She says, oh, this is amazing. I'm just really excited. You know, it's like just woman on the street, you know, like, they're motivated. They want to do something, but somehow the structure, you know, the community's not there. But boy, as they start to get hold of this, I think there's going to be a lot of people want to see and believe that these major improvements can be made in towards healthier communities. It's just somehow...
Right. And that special energy or spirit, however you want to identify what the it is of excitement, we are already seeing indicators of that. You know, I'll give one quick, really interesting example, and it happened here in Klatza. They had formed up and applied for the application to join the program. And we got the application, and we went through all 42 of the applicants and said, oh, okay, Klatza gets it, and they won. And we came out to visit them, and really beautiful location. If you haven't been out there, it's amazing.
Go there and spend your money.
Yeah, please. So we went out there, and of course, you know, you always put on your nice shirt and your nice shoes when you have visitors come over, so everybody's very cordial, and they're nice, and like, oh, okay, so great. We went away and had some calls with them, came back another time and had an actual workshop day, and everybody came and looked good, and we're working together and talking, and you know, one of the ladies was specifically, she's like, you know, can I pull you aside? Oh, sure, yeah, what's going on? I'm not getting along with so-and-so. And I'm like, oh. Call me. About a month later, the woman sent me an email and says, you know, I'm just having this conflict, this problem. I got on the phone with her, and it was a good hour and a half of listening. Literally just listening, and she's like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I was like, no problem. really didn't do anything. Gave her some advice, but really didn't do anything, and she described the situation. And these are all very basic team building dynamics that occur in any organization, right? But the ego was definitely playing a part in this. And the problem hadn't been quite resolved, but she felt a lot better. About a week and a half later or so, we said, well, let's get on a call, and we can listen to the Wellville team that's out there, and because there was some messaging that was going on that wasn't right. So all of the members got on the call, and they said, well, you know, we need to come together because the messaging isn't right. And I said, well, yeah, that's a great idea. You should. And they started talking, and Rick and I we listened, and they had the hour call, and they concluded. So right after the call, I called Rick. I said, it's happening. You know, they had come together, but they were coming together in a reaction. They saw a problem, they saw the application, they applied, they got it, they disseminated a little bit. Then this little small problem of messaging came up, they came together again, right? But in the middle, there was a little bit of ego. And so that's what we think is very important to start and build that foundation of any organization or team. But in the community, it was a beautiful example. And then I had mentioned it to the woman who called, and she's just like, oh my gosh, it was too close to the topic. So,
yeah, so you said something, we were talking the other day, and because some of these programs, the ones that I worked on and then saw some other people work on that didn't work out so well, and they were identified with like a city government or a county government or a state government coming out. And I think one of the things you said to me was like, we realized there was a key word here, which was community. And that this is not a government program, then really the team that you're building is a community team that's going to, can you amplify on that?
Well, first of all, the government is only one part of it. Yeah, I mean, in any community. Second, governments have to be risk averse because they're spending public money they collect through coercion. So they really can't waste it. And if they do, they get pilloried and they get kicked out of office. People like us who are outside the government can afford to make mistakes, not with people's lives, but we can have programs that don't work. We can try things that are new. There's just a lot more flexibility. But there's also, in the community, you want the private sector, you want the churches, you want the school board, and
Yep.
But the other interesting thing is, we go to all these places. I don't know if people are Republicans or Democrats. They don't, it's not, there's definitely politics, as Marvin described, but it's what the federal government does. Yes, it affects money flows and so forth, but it's really the wrong scale to make these kinds of changes. They need to be collective action, not, quote, government interference. Someday maybe government interference around the regulations for school food or something, but if you really want to make change, it needs to be collectively supported, at least. Then people will buy in, then it will seem to make sense.
I think that risk factor is crucial. Some of the stuff, like this lecture series, somebody said that universities bring in all sorts of wonderful speakers all the time, but they never really do this, okay? So we went to, for instance, to Metrographics, and we said, you can't do this, you don't want to really do this on your own, you've got your agenda, and I can't do it on my own, but if we work together, so it's this idea of win-win relationships. And I kind of think that's what you guys are doing. You're going, all these stovepipes, you go between the stovepipes and say, if these two stovepipes, if you guys work together, you can bring about something even more wonderful.
Yeah, one of the things that I believe in is that by having a very, very measurable, clear objective, all of a sudden, people can come around that. It's when the objective is murky or gray or not really well understood, and I think that's part of the problem with top-down, when you have this thing called government, and it's not one person, but government is this nebulous group of people, and is it a building or, we're not sure, but bottom-up grassroots, that's what we're really trying to enable, and that's really, it's pretty powerful because we're seeing it happen pretty fast.
I tried to get the universities to do some, sorry, go ahead.
But just to clarify, that is what we're doing in these communities. But the overall mission of HICCup is quite different. It's a demonstration. Kind and nice as we are, our mission is really not to help 5 small places. It's to use 5 small places to generate data to inspire people much more broadly. Because we don't really know what it looks like. There's lots of programs to do exactly what we're doing, but they don't interact, they don't reinforce one another, and mostly they dissipate. So the goal is to show, what does it really look like when you don't need a scientist to do a double regression analysis to see the difference, but you can actually, real estate agents will know, this is a good place to live. Employers will be excited. And then people, if we're successful,
Learn from that. Yeah.
What will happen in 5 years is people will say, if those jokers in Clatsop County could do it, so can we.
Yeah. Another thing is to emphasize what you just said, but my experience is watching these things is the risk aversion. So many of these organizations, and they have budgets and stuff like that, will go on like, well, what if we did this and we failed? Like they're going
yes.
Right.
And I'm worried about that. I'm not sure all 5 communities will.
Yeah, but the venture capitalist community that you come out of and have that mentality just has a kind of different
1 out of 10 is great.
Yeah, we're going to go for it, and it's and sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it doesn't work. But when it works, and even when it doesn't work, we learn a lot of stuff. But a lot of these other organizations that I think could have done more in the wellness area didn't because they were risk averse, and that's why I'm really excited about your whole initiative. This whole concept of doing it from the venture capital and that whole Silicon Valley mentality is great. Let's take a question from the audience here. Okay, yeah. Keith, go.
I'll walk up. First, just something to note that healthcare is like oil changes. Medical care is like tow trucks. And somehow we've let healthcare become tow trucks too. So first thing you could do that would be worth much more than $200,000 is generate a new word that means what healthcare used to mean. Next, metrics. When you're going out and measuring all of this stuff, a lot of the things we do are because of the metrics we choose. For example, we look at blood serum LDL cholesterol because it is correlated with cardiovascular events. It's correlated with a lot of other things too. The primary measurements are, of course, how many people die. The secondary measurements is how much plaque you've actually got in your blood vessels. But we don't cheaply test plaque, which we could with the right equipment. So we are going to have to start moving away from the tests that are easy. Cholesterol test is easy and it also responds to statins, but it doesn't necessarily mean statins are healthy. So we're going to have to start thinking about pushing people towards primary metrics, or at least secondary metrics, and finding out what it is in our system that drives us to these tertiary metrics, which aren't making us any healthier. So do you have any ideas along those lines?
So that's a really interesting discussion. And one interesting thing that's going to happen, is happening now, is non-invasive blood testing that will enable us to look at a whole range of different biomarkers and provide much better and more personalized and appropriate medical care. We're going to discover a whole lot of stuff. But we're, in Wellville, we're working with the healthcare system, and they are discovering more and more incentives to providing better health care, more specific along the lines you described, and figuring out how to do that more effectively. That will, it's not that it's easy, and it will happen faster if people like us and other people push it, but we're really more focused at the other end, where, it's less about treating individual people, but if you get the population, the average BMI in a population of school kids down, good things will happen.
Yeah.
So we don't, both for practical reasons and, again, we don't want to be these people from out of town coming around and inspecting all your kids. And yes, we want to publish a lot of data, but mostly aggregate. So we're focused more on changing overall conditions rather than individually testing each kid for particular metabolites or whatever.
So 30 kids step on the stage and you measure their average height and weigh the stage. Okay.
Or,
Kirby.
well, you have to compare the height of the kid to the weight of the kid, but it's population health. It's not individual in most cases. On the medical end, yes, it is, but not overall.
Kirby, over here.
Sorry, I'll be faster.
It's okay, that's a great answer. You mentioned school board and the churches. It seems to me, if I'm like the screenwriter making the DVD series of your company going into Clatsop County, what it comes down to for me is, you showed young people, it's going to be health education, which if we decode is sex education, what we tell them about drugs. You're going to find out they're not told very good, the curriculum sucks in Clatsop County. I'm just going to say that as a premise. I'm not saying it really does. I'm just saying, for the sake of argument, you're going to find out what they tell those kids in high school about health is very deficient, not just what they eat, but what they learn. Their curriculum is horrible. I know that. I'm just making it up. What are you going to do about that? You're just going to say, well, the church is in control, so we'll just have to leave now? Or are you going to actually fight and say, hey, kids, come to our class and we'll tell you what you really ought to know about these things? That was my question.
I think it's, how shall I say, we don't run these places. We don't run the churches. We don't run the community. We sort of depend on the community to make the right decisions. If we think they're doing something really crazy, we will tell them. And if we think we're learning as we go along. If I see really bad sex education, I'll say something.
Send my camera crew at the time. I want to be there.
I mean, whatever. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I applaud your efforts. As a nurse midwife and family nurse practitioner and certified nutritional practitioner, I've been in the field for 35 years trying to incorporate preventative medicine. And what I found is that there's no financial incentive for the bureaucracy to come on board with that. When a C-section costs $30,000 as opposed to maybe $15,000 or $17,000 for a vaginal delivery, there's no incentive for the medical system to join in to try and get those C-section rates down, which have come down any time midwives are hired. So there's been many instances where they've been fired because the bottom line has been affected. So the same is true for the food giants. There's no incentive there for them to take out the additives and preservatives and sugar. So that leaves it to a legislative effort when the healthcare budget is bankrupting the economy, which has been known for a decade or so. There's studies out there that have proven that the school diets are effective in increasing the health of the children and the behavior and their performance in school. The Wisconsin school project is out there, which was very effective. So there are models out there, and it's been known that a better nutrition and lifestyle affect the infant mortality rates. I mean, every industrialized country in the world gets better results than the U.S. We keep going down each year. We are now in about the 30th place. So we could go over to Poland and our babies would have a better chance. We could go to Luxembourg, who gets the best results in the world. So
Question.
the question is, how do you see creating incentives which is affecting the bottom line of all the major organizations?
Okay.
So first question for you, are you available?
I am.
We should talk, because you are the kind of person that the world needs more of.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably needs a bit fewer C-section performing doctors. But the answer to your question about incentives is exactly what we are trying to prove. That long-term, society overall will save a lot of money by doing the right things in the short term. And that includes diet and nutrition on one side, reducing C-sections, reducing a lot of what should be completely unnecessary or excessive medical care. The Affordable Care Act is doing part of that. They're not doing it around, right now the hospital still has the incentive to do the C-section. The rest of the community has an incentive not to, because it is very expensive. The reimbursements haven't quite caught up with that, but there are now, the medical systems are becoming, quote, accountable for the health of the community, which includes more cost-effective births, among other things. So those incentives are gradually changing. That still doesn't mean that each individual hospital isn't still trying to keep their beds full. And we're trying to create social impact financing vehicles that will accelerate that, where an investor will come in, put in money, for example, to a prenatal care program, and whether it's philanthropic or through actual diverting the healthcare dollars into what goes back to the investor, creating financial vehicles that will basically make that financial system work the way it should.
It'd be interesting to see how you achieve
Yes.
that. And I
It's
appreciate
going to be challenging.
the grassroots movement because that does have an impact. Already the supermarkets are scrambling because more people are going to farmers markets. So that's a really good trend. Right now in Oregon, there's 5 bills in the House and 5 in the Senate supporting the small farmers and the farm to school program. So
Right.
everybody, if you get on the phone and talk to your representatives, that could help with the school food situation.
thank-
So thank
Thank you.
Go.
I think as a society, we have a general sense of what's healthy. I mean, kids would be healthier if they went to McDonald's and drank carrot juice and ate apple slices rather than Coke and fries. But there's a lot of backlash when you try and change that system, and capitalism often has short-term thinking. So how do you balance long-term societal good with our current economic system?
Very good question. And we're trying to do it in 5 small places to show that it actually has good effects. But I mean, that is fundamentally the issue, short-term versus long-term. Different people pay while others benefit. So what we're doing, in a sense, is helping communities through collective action change some of those flows and prove how beneficial it can be.
Well,
You know, we're not doing anything innovative except that we are doing it.
we also are working with IBM to understand data and data metrics. And we are a data-driven organization, and our intent is to understand how to set up these pilots and understand how to measure and what to measure and when to measure, because that's really what will address some of these other, nebulous areas.
Yeah. I say there's one image that I was saying. Oops, is that working? Anyway, it was a leadership image, and one type of leadership is what's called directive leadership. So you go in an organization and you say, this is what we're going to do, this is the vision, get on the short, and you go. And the other is what is called facilitative leadership, which is kind of what you're going. So you go in an organization or a community that kind of knows what it wants to do. It wants to be a healthier community, but it can't figure out how to get it done. And so what you're doing in a way is that facilitative leadership. They know what they want to do, they know the kind of direction, but they're not sure how to get there, and they're not sure how to build these links and these relationships and so forth. So you're not going in, I think just say these people, you're not going in and say, okay, here's what you're going to do, and here's how you're going to do it. You're just going in and saying, we know you guys want to be healthier, you know this is a natural motivation. How are we going to get it done? Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the final thing is, I'm a journalist, and I kind of have this, if you like, mantra that, you can't tell people what to do, but if you show them the truth and they can see it, that's going to be more persuasive than anything. I mean, I happen to believe that the truth should guide what you do. And if it turns out the truth doesn't prove what you wanted to prove, then you have to change your mind. But if you can show a truth that is persuasive, ultimately people will follow. I mean, then you probably need to do PR campaigns around it. But we're trying to show a truth that we believe will be persuasive. And that's the third kind of leadership.
As I said, Marvin and I were talking earlier, and some of the stuff that we did, and I said, just like this girl I was mentioning down on the beach, at Canada Beach, and I said, these are what we call the red hots, okay? And these are the ones that are so motivated to do what you want to do. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we should do that. Yeah, we should do that. Why don't you do that? And then there are these people who are like...
They're self-selecting leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then at the other end, they're the people who can't find healthy food, and they can't afford it. They can't get to their appointments. And that's... It's not simply, people just need more self-discipline. It's... They can't find the decent food. They can't afford it. They can't get the health care. The parent who doesn't know how to raise the child.
At a very tactical level, right, Esther is right. Identifying the things that they can't occur. But also what happens is mentally the community has gone a little bit stagnant sometimes. I'm not talking about clots up, just in general. And they don't know how to think outside the box in this sense. And they didn't realize that right over here, the corporation X, oh, well, wow, we should maybe talk to them. They might have a great idea, and they start to bond. And they just didn't realize that. So, one of the things that we, in one of the other communities, they have these food deserts. And one not-for-profit organization wanted to have a pop-up store that would bring healthy vegetables and fruits. And I said, well, how's it going to work? And she said, well, I'm going to, I have them get a van in the summer, and I'm going to drive all the way down half the country, or half the state, to get these fruits and vegetables and drive back. And I said, well, you have these networks already, the grocery store and the vendor, location. And so she wasn't thinking that, oh, I should tap into those existing networks and see if we can leverage those opportunities. It's just a point of view,
Cool. So, go ahead.
Hi. I'm a mental health provider, 30 years private practice. I'm from Clark County, the other side of the river. I'm also an environmental activist, so my lens is really environmental health and mental health. I have a very simple question for you. I've been to 3 of the 5 communities on your map. I think of them as rebuilding places, the 3 of the 5 that I know. I really like what you said about grassroots. I sit in my office, I hear a lot of people from a lot of places. There's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of despair across the board. The educators are flat on their feet, they're exhausted. You're running out of physical health providers, you're certainly running out of mental health providers. So I get grassroots, I get red hot leaders, been one of them. I want to hear about sustainability. How do you take this forward? What are you going to offer besides statistics? Here's what we learned. Then what? Because I think the next step is buy-in. And buy-in has to come from an individual and a community and an activism. I'm not hearing that. I'm curious about that.
You want to?
So
Anybody?
he can talk about the individual buy-in, but there's also creating institutions and financial models that will persist. So there's 2 kinds of sustainability. Go ahead.
Just full disclosure here, I spent 14 years in the Marine Corps. And so I look at the opportunity from a very different echelons of approach to the country, so to speak. And the phase that we are in right now is that we're just leaving the listening phase, right? We've reached these communities, we've listened and listened and listened. We've been building rapport to understand who are the natural selected leaders and what are they saying to us. Does that match up with the indicators that we're getting from the data that the county has provided on the metrics? I'm not going to tell you that we have the social impact bond figured out or that we even understand which program is going to be the one that they're going to select because they don't even know yet. But what I can tell you is that the draw right now and getting the people to come together is very powerful so far. And the discussion of this mental change of, wait a minute, we don't have to apply for the grant. You're telling me that there might be an opportunity for us to understand that sustainability and this thing called wellness can be an investment? Whoa, that's the reactions that we're getting. And that's at a very tactical level in the community. At the same time, we're reaching at the governance level, at the state and the federal, to start to understand the mechanisms in which these investments could exist. So these are 2 parallel efforts, right? Constantly listening, developing relationships and rapport at the state and the federal level, and then continuing to have that vision. So in fact, one of the things that we do constantly is every week or every 2 weeks, I'm always like, okay, is our desired end state still the same? Is our current situation still the same? Has it changed? Because we know that we have to adjust as we gather more information moving in the 5-year program. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where we are right now.
It helps. I'd like to see it in a year because what I'm interested in,
So would I.
is I think the general population has a lot of despair and a lot of stuckness, and I'd like to see the motivation you're talking about. But thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for doing health too, mental health, because that's a big, big thing.
Got it. One over here. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm actually a city councilman over in Clark County, Washington. One of my other hats is I'm on the board of trustees of the Association of Washington Cities Employee Benefits Trust. We've got about 38,000 lives under coverage. One of the puzzles that we honestly wake up in the middle of the night worrying about is how in the world are you going to flatten the slope on healthcare cost? In general, we believe that wellness is the way to do that, and that wellness is a much larger concept than cholesterol levels. So I'm very excited by this project. I can't imagine that it wasn't well informed by the Blue Zones project
Yes.
in Iowa, among other places.
Right.
That said, the really interesting problem, maybe even the meta problem, is how do you build a community? How do you transform a bunch of rooftops into a community? And it's an interesting question around a community around wellness, but I think that's really at core the fundamental problem here is how do you create a community? And I don't really have a question, but I'd like to hear your response.
Well, honestly, as I said earlier, we're stacking the deck. We're not trying to create the communities. We looked for 5 places that we thought had a much better than average chance. Because what we do believe is that showing examples of success will encourage people to try. Building a community is even harder than what we're trying to do. We're trying to help a community that already exists do it better, repair things, learn from others, but there's already that initial capability there. It's like we're a business accelerator for startups that have already got a pretty good team. We're not a business accelerator that's going to go pick people at random and say, hey, you start a business, we'll help you.
Right.
So that's the reality. We don't want to pretend to be able to do more than we can. Because we're a teeny little team, we're not for profit. But if we can do it, then other people can do the same. So that's the answer, or the response anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm an occupational therapist, as many healthcare professionals in this group, I think. Very much interested in your program. OT evolves out of health and wellness. We are concerned with how people occupy their time, their lifestyle, how it contributes to health and well-being. So when I hear your program, the bigger picture to me is a cultural change. It's a paradigm shift, quite frankly, in the way we look at health and well-being in all of our communities. Talk to me a bit, because what I'm hearing you say is you can't provide unordered merchandise, what I call. You have to have an intrinsic drive to change. And these people who are these communities have demonstrated that in some way through their applications, correct?
The leadership has.
Okay, so my question is, you can always pull the big leaderships, the hospitals and such.
Yep.
Where is the drive? What are the groups in those 5 communities that you're observing from your experience?
Yeah.
Where real energy, because it has to come from the non-corporate, non-government,
Yeah.
non-school. Where's it coming from?
Okay. To be honest, I don't totally agree with your premise.
What's that?
The premise is that all the people have to change.
Oh, no.
The premise is...
didn't imply that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if that's
No.
what was understood.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is we want to change the environment around many of the people so that the environment doesn't undermine people's attempts to live normal, healthy lives.
Right.
Ideally, big corporations aren't selling them sugar-laden drinks. They're not being assaulted all the time by liquor ads. When they want healthy food, they can find it and it's affordable. Because let's face it, most people are not thinking about their health all the time, and we don't want them to have to. We want it to be easier and a default. I mean, yes, at some point they need to make a decision to go out and exercise, but we don't need everybody in the community to be thinking about their health all the time.
Environment's a huge piece.
Yes. Right. So it's not motivating everybody. It's changing enough people that it spreads. And
Right.
it's...
Where's that coming from?
Right, right. You know, I want to add to that. It is a situationally based answer. Each community has a different topology, demographic,
Need.
economic, and as a result of that, you know, based upon the basic principles of design, we're going to apply a variety of tactics. Most won't work. But in that process, you're going to filter out people that really want to come in and partake in that. So
That's what I guess my question is, who's around the table besides those big
right,
systems?
right. So in the initial phase, which we're ending right now, were the self-appointed, right? People that said, hey, I heard about Wellville, I want to apply.
I'm in, yeah.
Right, great, that got us into the community. We're there, we're listening. Now we have to figure out, okay, great, you've self-appointed. What about these other people that are actually in their homes and don't maybe know about Wellville or don't have access to the internet or are, you know, the 10% that are really costing the community the 90% of the fees that occupy that. That's what we're looking at right now, and that's a whole, you know, PR campaign. It is a variety of marketing and elements that can reach out into those nooks and crannies within the community to really get those people out and say, you know, what are your needs? And so that's what we know so far.
But it's also institutional change around the people who aren't going to pay attention.
Right.
And, you know, helping people not to go back into jail or get mental health treatment when they need it.
You know, one of the things that you and I talked about in some of my experience in finding the red hots is to anoint them. Okay,
Empowerment, sure.
we did, yeah. So we would go into these businesses and we'd find these former rally girls or something like that were gaining a little weight, and they really wanted to see a community program within their business, and they were willing to do extra stuff to make this program work. And if there were any problems, they would step in. But it was really important, I think, that we sort of anointed them as leaders. So it's almost like you guys go in and say, give them a cap
Right.
or a shirt or something that says you're part of the Wellville program.
Right, and that's what the Wellville. That's part of what the Wellville. We've heard them. This is a quote. You know, now that we have Wellville, we have an umbrella that we all fall under.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's the people that want to do the marathon, or the people that want to walk, and they have an event in the summertime, or you know, these different stovepiped. I don't want to call them stovepipe, but they're just separate groups, right? And they're doing good. You know, they're getting people out to walk, and they're raising their money, but they weren't under a what we're calling community umbrella, and that's what we're seeing has a very positive response.
I like it. Go ahead.
Yes, there have been some communities that have done better than others in terms of longevity, some religious communities that preach very abstemious behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And we hear today of 30 other countries that are doing better than us already. So I say that then we have a disease in our society here, and the way to improve the situation is to treat the disease. I haven't heard you identify the disease. I haven't heard you identify the treatment. Why aren't we treating the disease and speaking out about whatever the damn thing is that's causing us to be so sick? You know, I can sit here and say, well, this will all go away if you outlaw automobiles, computers, and television sets. Who's got a better solution than that?
The disease is a lack of social, not just social spending, but if you like, health-producing environment, and that's what we're trying to rectify.
I have one more comment, because I worked on this sort of stuff, and there's a difference between a problem-based effort and an opportunity value actualization type of. I used to call it the John Lennon transform, because John Lennon had this comment, he said, there are no problems, they're just opportunities.
Yes.
So in some sense, if you have a problem that you're trying to solve, that sort of boxes you. But if you go in like you guys, facilitative and finding these things, and you say a lot of listening and what the people want to do and how they want to do it and how they want to experiment, I think then there's all this opportunity space there. Let's see if we can get it moving.
And you don't need to take advantage of every opportunity to have quite an impact. I mean, the world doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be quite a lot better than it is.
I will say a baseline. There is a baseline, I believe, and Maslow did it best, right? So, food, clothing, shelter. If you can get those three, that's actually a pretty good start, and a lot of people don't have all three, and so that's where the struggle comes in, and out of that comes a variety of other things, but food, clothing, shelter can be very, very powerful. Just
go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for coming here tonight. It's good to see you again. Let's see, I'm just a simple handyman, and I am listening to, I see the value of limiting the scope of what you study, not 100, not 1, but down to say 5. And when I'm listening to it, I'm looking for, what can I do? What are the 5? What do I need to do to say improve my wellness? What are you guys looking at? What's the matrix?
Okay. I don't know you, so I don't know what you're not doing that you should be. But fundamentally, you need to eat right, get exercise, have friends, brush your teeth, go to the doctor regularly, so if you have something in particular, you know about it and you can deal with it. Don't drink too much or take drugs. And those are kind of the big ones. Fasten your seatbelt.
Then is that what you're looking at in your matrix for this study, or
no?
What you're doing?
So the outcome metrics are your kind of health outcomes. Have we lowered the number of transitions to diabetes? What's the BMI? What's life expectancy? The inputs, as you heard, are some of these specific things around early childhood nutrition, diabetes management. I mean, so each program is going to have its own outcomes in terms of, did we reduce the number of transitions to diabetes? Have we lowered the number of underweight births? Have we reduced the number of cesareans? Have we saved money? Those are specific to the individual programs. Then the overall health results are much broader population-based measures of more generic health measurers.
So in the different communities, are you studying different, say, using different measurements?
Different programs with their own specific measurements. The overall health measurements after 5 years are the same, are the sort of the same metrics. Okay. And there'll be the county health rankings or something that are set by a third party. We're not going to be measuring our own success in a broad way. We will definitely be evaluating each specific program according to the desired outcomes.
Sure. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, good evening. One of the strongest correlates I know with longevity is wealth. And George Orwell pointed out in The Road to Wigan Pier and Down and Out in Paris and London that poor people are often criticized for making bad health choices, when in fact the reason for those choices is simply to make life more bearable in what's a pretty grim situation. Do you think it's realistic to think that we can fix people's health without fixing poverty as well, which is a rather larger problem than you're focusing? I also wondered, since you've said you're a data-driven organization and I'm an open source devotee, who do you plan to make that data available to, and what purposes do you plan to put it to?
Open data for everybody to use, not obviously at the individual level, but
no PII, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our mission is, we don't give the community money, they don't pay us, but we do, the basic contract is your data is available for other people to use and benefit from. Back to the first one, if you want to fix you can improve people's health without totally solving poverty. They're completely correlated, and we believe economic development is key to this. But the way to go in is through health. It's more politically acceptable. It is for real. And if you improve people's health, it's easier for them to get a job, to hold a job. They're not dealing with their sickness, they're not paying medical bills. So there's a correlation and a positive, if we fix health, we're helping to reduce poverty, even if, and we see that as a better way in than income redistribution, for example. So that's our approach. But we're not going to, as I said, you can make a huge amount of improvement even if you don't hit 100%. And George Orwell is one of my
So
favorites.
as you brought that up, I had a couple of things. So some friends of mine and I have been thinking about some of this stuff, and we have, you're probably aware that the McDonald's guys are trying to kick their minimum wage up to $15 an hour, and you're probably aware of this. There's a graph that I always use where in the 50s, 60s, productivity and minimum wage were lockstep. And then about 1970, minimum wage flattens, and productivity, I think, goes up 241%, and minimum wage went up 100%. So if we had linked minimum wage and productivity, minimum wage now would be somewhere between 20 and 25 bucks an hour. So what do we want to do about that? Now, my radical proposal is to put a ballot measure on the Oregon ballot, which we're going to try and do, to raise the minimum wage in Oregon to 20 bucks an hour. My guess is it's going to pass, and for two reasons. For obviously the minimum wage workers are going to vote for it, but also the people who say they go like, "Wow, this woman coming up in her mink coat and her Cadillac getting food stamps, lazy." No, it's like it's an English term. Our honest day's work for an honest day's pay. I think the move back to that, and you see it going on nationally. Stiglitz is coming here next month about inequality, and I think this inequality thing is really, really major. And getting tax reform, good luck. But we can, as voters, raise the minimum wage. And once you do that, a lot of people have to be squeezed and stuff. My friend who builds houses said it would increase I asked him, I said, well, how much if we went up to 20 bucks an hour? He said, oh, God, all these guys, we got 300 guys work to build a house. I said, give me an estimate of what you think if we went, most of them are paying 12 to 15 bucks an hour. So if we went up to 20 bucks an hour, what would we do? He said, increase the cost of a house by about 10%. So we can live with that, particularly if I double everybody's income. So a lot of people will qualify for that. Anyway, that's one problem. My other one, another ballot measure, which ties into this, I've been asking this question for a long time. And my daughter's over in England, and I see she sends things on Instagram, and like you're in Paris, and then you're here, and then you. So do you ever work? She said, well, Dad, I get 5 weeks of vacation over here. Now I've been asking myself, I think since I was a teenager, why do the Europeans get 5 weeks of vacation every year? In the U.S., you don't even get a week until you've gone your first year. So ballot measure, mandatory 5 weeks of vacation in Oregon. Huge.
I'm moving to Oregon.
Are you guys? Why not? It's very straightforward. The Europeans do it. It's not like it's going to break the bank or anything like that. Tremendous stimulus to the recreation industry, and I think it's very, very good for health. People actually, if you only have a week off a year or no time, so it's a real boot. Both the minimum wage and the vacation thing would be, to me.
I'm going to agree with you, but I'm going to say that in the communities that we're working in, just building more jobs.
That would build more jobs.
Is what I think. How do I get Apple, Oracle, or Salesforce to put a office in Clatsop?
Yeah, a call center. Yeah. It's extremely complicated, is the short answer. If I were doing this, I would pay community health workers double wages. Forget the minimum wage. We need to pay our teachers and our community workers and all these personal service people more, and we need to respect them more. And those are the jobs that are not going to be automated away.
They're not going to
and
China.
We worry about unemployment, yet we won't somehow train people to do these very valuable jobs. And that's really a lot of the solution to a lot of these problems.
There's a guy, do you know Nick Hanauer? He was one of the early investors in Google, but he's up in Seattle now and does a bunch of venture capital stuff, and he's been on Politico and so forth. And his basic thesis, which I think is correct, is that by raising the minimum wage, you actually put more money into the community. Okay, because how many meals are the the billionaires buying in your community? Not much. But if we take some of that money and bring it, by just in a fair way, then that all of a sudden stimulates. So what's going to stimulate jobs is in fact raising minimum wage. People say, oh, it's going to kill jobs. No, I mean, McDonald's, they say like, oh, if we raise the minimum wage, we're going to have to lay off all these people. I don't think so, because all of a sudden a lot of people can have more money to buy McDonald's food. If you want to lay people off, great, because another business opportunity will start feeding those people.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Maybe, though, we can get McDonald's to change its menu slightly.
Yeah, good.
Anyway.
Okay, Steve.
Supersize me. I almost forgot my question. I am on the Eastern Oregon Support Services Board. I'm the president, and we take care of 437 disabled and elderly people, basically, who have nobody else watching out for them. It's interesting you brought up minimum wage, because at our board meeting last Monday, we were talking about the fact that new bill is actually going to impact the caregivers that we have, and we're going to have to adjust our model somewhat. But that's not my question. I invited the director, the executive director, to come with me to this tonight. His name's Bill Ullman, a wonderful man, okay? And he says, no, I'm not going to come with you. I know how to be healthy. That's not the problem. He says, I just don't know how to get motivated. So my question is very simple. What is your feedback cycle to the people you're working with? Because if you don't give them feedback relatively immediately that they're making progress, you're going to be a short-term, you're not going to be sustainable. In my own life, in 1986, when they closed our schools down in 1984 out in Estacada, I sat at my desk as a teacher and I said, by God, I'm worth an hour and a half a day, which I hadn't been giving myself. And ever since then, I've spent an hour and a half a day doing some sort of rigorous exercise. But that was a decision, and it was because of the feedback of my health was gone, just bad. So your feedback cycle is really going to be important in the communities, to the individuals and to the community. Some sort of newsletter or some sort of positive thing that, yeah, you're making progress even though we've only been doing this, and there are indicators that you can do this. By the way, there are two other organizations you must connect up with while you're here. I've been involved with both, and they're both great. One of them is Communication Across Barriers, which is in Clatsop County. I can give you the number. And she deals with poverty. She was homeless for 28 years. She now has her doctorate and advises the Supreme Court on poverty. And the other one is the Rural Development Initiative. And they do exactly what you're doing, only with the Chamber of Commerce's and the businesses, and how to establish new ways of doing business in these small communities. And they're in Clatsop County, too.
What was the second one?
Rural Development Initiatives, RDI, and it's RDI Inc., and they're in Eugene. And they don't give people money or anybody money. What they do is they facilitate the very same things you're doing, and so does Donna, Dr. Beagle. She facilitates. She's got a wonderful model, by the way. And she doesn't use public money either. She uses basically the Jubitz Foundation.
Okay,
anyway,
so we're
feedback
kind of
cycle.
over. Yeah, okay.
Feedback cycle. How are you going to do that?
Well, you can give them that info later too. So I'm going to just say that we're kind of over time now, so I'm going to cut it there, and you can, Cece, you can ask her a question afterwards and stuff.
I ask a question.
Cece,
what is your feedback cycle? I really want to know.
Okay, Cece, go ahead.
All right, I'll make it one question, not two. If I live in Clatsop County, how do I know what this is? How do I communicate with Wellville? Is there social media? I mean, what's going on with that?
Yeah, we, again, we're not at that stage yet. You know, we've been in the listening phase, but the CLATSOP itself got a bunch of different leaders that have self-appointed and elected, and they've decided that they've got their Wellville committee now, and they're creating their subcommittees. So that entity, again, you know, it's not us per se, right? But that entity itself is starting to put their structure into place. And, you know, I would think in the third phase of, you know, program development, right now they're still structuring and program development, and then there'll be execution, right, and measurement. So it's kind of a little farther out still, but it's more of a phased approach. Yeah.
But at the same time, just, you know, we are not a PR campaign in favor of healthy living. It really is changing the institutions and the environment. And yes, there may well be a Wellville losing weight challenge, or there may be a Wellville healthy eating campaign, or a Wellville dental campaign. But fundamentally, we're not trying to get everybody to care about their own health, because that's really going to reach only a small subset of the population that has the time to worry about it. And what we're trying to do is change the conditions for people who don't have the time to worry about it. So it's beyond a marketing message. It really is a change the environment so that it's easier to be healthy without making it a focus. And that's why it's less about feedback to individuals and more about feedback to the institutions that this or that program is having an outcome and it needs to be funded, and figuring out the funding mechanism for all these things. And
I just wanted to answer the feedback loop question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, again, your question is a tactical one, which is going to be associated to a program. So I would say to you that, I'll give you a real quick example. You know, in Spartanburg, we're working with IBM on real-time intervention at an individual level. So that is a concept that is being discussed right now and thought through. If that does take and sticks, and maybe we'd roll it out in CLATSOP also. So again, I think that's a little farther down the chain, but your point is well taken, and definitely it's, you know, I think we all want to get healthier. That's not the problem. I think it's a variety of other social, you know, determinants.
And metrics and measurement.
Yep.
I mean, those outcomes matters.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
we're...
Let's say, last word? No? We're there.
No,
That's it?
Anybody who wants to learn more about CLATSOP, help us out, help them out, Dyson at HICCup.co. And
right.
Terry will tell you if
it's
you can't write it down.
HICCup.co, right?
.co.
Why is it not .com?
That was already taken.
Because it's like a site about how to stop hiccuping.
Okay, so it's HICCup.co. Yeah, and it's in the program and stuff like that. Okay, so everybody, give a big thank you and encouragement here. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.